professor in theology, in philosophy, in social science, etc., etc. I'm now a professor in psychiatry in the academic hospital in Utrecht, the center of the Netherlands. And I'm associated professor here in the Northwest University in Potchefstroom. So I'm not a specialist in dementia, but I'm interested in that and have experience about that, but I'm interested in care. I would say a care ethicist.
My name is Rayne Stroebel. I have a passion for the care of vulnerable people and people living with dementia. I completed my PhD last year in dementia studies, and I've been working in the field of aged care for the past 27 years. Andries, I want to start with, theory and practice. So one of your claims to fame is the beautiful theory of presence. I see Marije, your book. When Marije walked in, her notebook says on the front,
be present.
Be present. So you are the father of the theory of presence. And you talk about the ethics of care. And we are going to talk about, can we know the lived experience of vulnerable people? And that's regardless of what their vulnerability is. If it's people with mental health challenges or people living with dementia. Walking the road from the theory of presence, and tell us what that is, to practical care and the ethics of that. How does it become an ethical matter?
So I became a rather young age professor. You did your studies, you have written your books, you have supervised a PhD, etc., etc., and then I became professor. But I was very intrigued by carers that care very well, but did not do what was mentioned in the books. In the first year of my first professorate was finding out what do they people actually. So it's rather a remarkable thing. So you have those books. If you are caring, you should, for instance, be empathic. And then I saw beautiful carers that were not that empathic, but beautiful carers. Or you should have a good definition of the problem, of your intervention. You should apply it in a good way, and then you should evaluate it. And then I saw carers very much appreciated by patients, but they didn't do that. The starting point was I was intrigued. So I started a search, what are they actually doing? And I started that search by observing people. And observing people means, it's until now the same thing. I want to be part of their life. So if you want to know how caring people are doing their job, in neighborhoods, in hospitals, or in houses, homes, or whatever, I want to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning and I stay until midnight. And I am until now the only one who experienced the whole cycle. Doctors come in and go out. Nurses come in and they go out, but nobody knows what's happening. For instance, if I come now on the ward and I see a patient at 8 o'clock, she's confused, for instance, she's confused, I can observe her the whole day. During breakfast, during lunch, in the evening when they are watching TV, how she goes to bed, when she returns from bed, or whatever. So I have always done it in that way. So if you want to help carers, you should be part of the work. My first research was about ministers in a disadvantaged neighborhood for 10 years. So 7 years. I interviewed them every month. I was with them in the same place. I read their diaries. I analyzed their preachers. I have seen them doing home visits, etc. And then you get an image what they do, how they do it, why they are doing, and why they are not complying one-to-one to those books. And for me it was a big revelation. Saying, my goodness. I'm very interested in theorizing, so after all that kind of empirical things, I tried to make a theory. So I have first sub-theories and then higher theories, and then in the end we have the theory. That is the theory of presence. In a book as thick as the Bible itself, yeah, it's 1,000 pages, so really thick. But I want you to understand that my idea of presence is not a theoretical construct. It is what I have seen that people do if you could say, those are good carers. So I'm not the inventor of presence, I am the one who theorized about it, who in a systematical way described it, explored it, and grounded in philosophy, etc., etc., etc. So that is how it started. So in those days it was just a thing within church, within theology. I stopped to be a professor in theology and then started to be a professor in philosophy, and then it was broader, and now in the Netherlands it has nothing to do with theology anymore. It's just that people say, that is how I want to be. People actually did it, they did it. I described it, I explored it, made it in a systematical way, and that's the way I work until now. So I have written more than 30 books, but it's still the same. I start in the hospital, on the ward, I stay there. I want to see it. If you want to help carers as they are here, be with them. If you want to be for them. So that simple sentence, I use it for patients. If you want to be for the patient, you should be with them. You can't come in and say, well, I'm the expert in the field, I'm social worker, I'm minister, I'm whatever I'm the doctor, and I know what we have to give you. No, be with them, look who he or she is, what people are longing for, not just what the problems are, what are they longing for, what are their boundaries, what want to be treated, etc., etc. So in essence, what I see that good carers do, they start relating. Who are you? What are your feelings? What is your context? Where do you come from? What is your story? Well, sometimes we use the metaphor, I learned it from a colleague. She says, everything you have learned to do it in your backpack. You should have a well-filled backpack. Come here, look who he is, and then take from your backpack what he needs. Relate, see not only the problem, longing, shame, whatever, context, etc. And then you need that backpack. So it is not sufficient to say, I'm relational, but I don't have a backpack. So in essence, it starts with relating. So we call that bracketing. Bracketing means everything that you want, put it between brackets. First, the other. So don't start with your intentions, don't start with your language, with your rhythm. And for instance, as you know, for people suffering from dementia, the thing of language and rhythm is essential. If you start with your rhythm, I don't think that you will be successful. If you start in your language, in your speed, etc. So saying relating is the same as saying, I'm not the center of care. It's not about me. It's not about my intentions. It's not about what I think they do. It's difficult. You have to exercise that. If you are training volunteers, then always the problem is they don't have a lack of humanity. Not at all. They are friendly, they are gentle, etc. But they want to talk about themselves. They want to talk about the thing that they think that they care. So that's a problem. Good examples are, for instance, and sometimes people say, of course, I'm poor. That's true. But I want just someone listening to me. The problem of the money, of course it is a problem, but please stay with me. Stay with me. So if I say, on the one hand, you have that kind of professional thinking, we need it, mostly need it, but it should not be your focus point of orientation. Orientation should be the other. Who is he or she? What is she longing for? And then we will discover that people are not always longing for what we call the solution. They are longing for something else or somebody else. I don't know.
The interesting thing is that we all want to teach people how to care. I remember from the first time that we met that you made it quite clear that you cannot. You cannot teach people how to care. And this is this sort of almost double-edged sword, is because we ask people, our caregivers, and tell them what to do. And the battle between doing and being. And when you are being, you have to leave the doing at the door. And how difficult that is, because we have, families with expectations. Things should happen here. And I keep on saying, but it's not a crash. No, but we have an activities coordinator and they should do activities. But then, to go deeper, and something that you also taught me is around the ethics of care. And that in our context in South Africa is a difficult conversation. Can you tell us what your again, bringing this into the practical, It is an ethical issue.
I would say, if you are thinking about caring, we are thinking about what kind of society do we want? Do we want people suffering from dementia to be part of our society or expelled? So my thinking of care is always morally informed thinking who matters. I've studied theology. I would say the last, the least, the lost matters most. So it's a very simple message, a message from Gandhi. Normally, if we look to how we educate people in caring, we start with an instrumental way of thinking. This is the problem, we have to define it as precise as we can, and then we would say, we know from evidence, if this is the problem, this is how we should do it. I agree with that. We need that kind of knowledge, how to operate people, how to feed people, how to handle diabetes or whatever, etc., etc. But there is another question: why I'm helping white patients with diabetes and not black? So caring is always the question: who matters, who we will think.
So that leads then into how do we teach this kind of moral thinking? For me, most of my training is about creating an environment where the caregiver is seen and heard and honored and recognized for the work that they do. So, is that part of the teaching? Create an environment in which they feel that they can do this kind of moral job.
I would say, don't want to train them, form them. So I've written an article that's rather similar, where I would say, don't train them, they need a formation. So it starts with the thing, do you think that for carers they need more instrumental tools, more instrumental competences, or do you think that it starts all with the good attitude, with a good perception, being able to see what people are going through? The perception is essential. So I would say, don't say we have to train people, we have to learn them to care, but it starts all with perception. Can't you see? It's so incredible if we ask that question on our ward with patients. Say who on this ward is present to you, then they say, for instance, that is the one who serves the meals. Not the doctor. That's another source. So the first one is more on the level of attitude. How are you perceiving? How are you thinking? But the other one is, you know from your own experience what it is to be treated in a respectful way and be seen or not be seen. So why are we not using that kind of experience? If we want to form carers, we need scientific knowledge, of course, methodological things, so what is meant, but we need their own experience. You hardly can be a good carer if you're not using your own experience. And that is a relevant, I would say, observation, because we educate people not to use their experience, but to use what they are learned by books and by supervisors and professors like me, etc., etc. So we ask them, leave the private part out and be much more a anonymous public figure with competences. But that's not how it works. Thinking about professionalism is a big thing. It's a big thing. And it's a big fight too. So that kind of professional thinking, that we are training people to be competent, it's a dangerous way of saying it, I would say. I think that in the case of dementia, you should be competent in your powerlessness. I said that on a big conference about dementia, being competent in your powerlessness, but it is good.
There was a wonderful lecture by Professor Arthur Kleinman at UCT Medical School a few years ago, where he said, and his topic was caregiving and goodness.
Yeah.
And he said he only, as a medical anthropologist, and I mean, in medical anthropology, being a world leader, he only started to realize what caring means when his own wife was diagnosed with dementia. He said that is when he, for the first time in his life, after also theorizing about it, but he made this statement, and he said it a few times. He said, we have trained caregiving and goodness out of the medical fraternity. And that is, the competencies that we have trained, and how we have trained people to be very powerful with these, with these trolleys, and these trolleys get bigger and bigger. So talk to us about that, about competencies to be powerless.
I like this to state previously, it's a nasty thing. It is a nasty thing, it stays a nasty thing, and will be ever a nasty thing. So we are taking care of people, etc., but we are not going to repair whatever. So that you can't repair. The only thing that you can do is, and there is good research about it, is being with the people, being with them. So there you have the reformulation of being present, being with them, in order to find out what you can do for them. But firstly, you have to be with them. And we know from research and we know from practice that if you, exactly as you stated a minute ago, if you think as a carer, I'm going to solve the problem, or to soften the problem, or I am going to prevent people from shouting, or from being aggressive, or from spitting food or whatever, then you are absorbed with your own intentions. It's not going to happen, or unless you are not powerful, but I would say compelling people or whatever. So using force. And I have had many years with my students that I thought, well, we are going to go in detail about care. First, I show you a little movie footage from caring about people with dementia. And then we saw them struggling about food, or struggling about people taking out of bed, or putting on clothes, etc. And then I asked my students, what have you seen? And they said, violence. Not care, violence. So the intention of those carers is not violence. Let's be sure. They want the best of their patients or the best of the residents. That's not a problem. So I'm not blaming that kind of people. But what you see is you are struggling about food, struggling about order, struggling about shouting, struggling about everything. And in the end, if you come from Mars, you would say, that's not care. Are they calling that care? No, it's not. So for me, it's essential to see that, to say good intentions, but hard to handle. What is the problem? And I would say one of the problems is you have to accept that you are powerless. You have to accept that you are not doing wonders. Some of us could, sometimes they do. We have indeed excellent workers. Sometimes they make a difference. But if you are in the sector of dementia, and my own research is much more focused on the advanced stages of dementia, so not the beginning, the advanced, or the very advanced, so the last stage of dementia. Nobody is going to wonder. So you need another kind of mindset, and that is nearness, that is being interested in small things, that is not being interested in yourself, that is to be humble enough to take the rhythm of the other, which is difficult. That is the modesty to say, well, the verbal language is no use anymore. Is there anything like a body language, the language of the body? So that is judging, and that is accepting your powerlessness and looking for new languages, new rhythm, new interests, etc., etc. And if you do so, you can have a good time yourself. You could have a good time yourself. And I'm sure that your care is much better. But the problem is we have, as I now experience in our clinic of people with severe psychiatric problems, we can't solve the problem. We can't solve the problem. And that kind of pretensions is misleading. I would say it's rather misleading. Don't think.
So it's so fascinating. In my research, I did my fieldwork in Hangberg, little community in Hartway, and I started the section on fieldwork by saying, Hangberg is not a problem to be solved.
Yeah.
And I think we can say this, that we are, unfortunately, we put people in positions where we, give them this notion that they must solve the problem of the person living with dementia, whatever it is. And we have the expectations of families that when my mother now lives here, I joke about Nazareth House. I said to the caregivers, you are not Jesus. You cannot turn water into wine. I say that with respect. Even if you could, this is not a problem to be solved. So again, Andries, I remember you telling me the first time we met that you do experiential teaching. I mean, people literally come in and have to be a patient.
Yeah.
And you make them powerless.
Yeah. So if we come to the chapter of formation or learning, what are people learning if you want them to be as relational as you can? So there are many stones. So the first of them is good example. So I'm writing books, I know, I'm famous about that, but people learn more from good examples than from my books, to be honest. So good examples. So I think the analytic approach, to say, well, do it step by step, etc., the analytic approach is just applicable on a few carers, but most of them love to look to movies or to footage or so. So I have my own big library of all kinds of films. So that's the first thing. And that is because films are referring to your mind and to your heart and to your morality and to your storytelling thing, etc. So that's the first thing. Good examples from living people. And then it's interesting that you have to learn people. Somebody, for instance, you see the good example, and someone in that example is very empathic. And they say to me, what do you want to me? Should I have put my hand on his shoulder? And then I would say, it depends on who he is. If I am that, I wouldn't love that. What should I do? They are asking for rules. You give them examples. They ask them for rules. Then they say, but should I look them in the eyes? I would say, if you are talking about anything that is shameful, I shouldn't do that. What's your rule? I don't have a rule, but you have to find out how it works with him. But should I address him in that way. So it depends on who he is. And people think that's extremely frustrating. Give me rules. Should I have my head? And I don't give him rules. So good examples, don't boil them down into a set of rules. But if you give them many, many examples, then they are competent in specific situations. Say, I have seen how people do it. I've seen. So you don't need obedient carers. You need reflective carers. With many good examples, with parts of theories, with good examples. And then another part of our formation is we always want people to be the addressee. So if you are a nurse, you are a trained nurse, we put you in the bed. If you are going to be a helper or carer for people with dementia, we put you in this kind of house. So that's not an easy thing. People will do it for a few days or whatever. It's very confronting. So normally you are on the other side, you know how to handle, you know that you go home, etc., etc. So we have a specific institution where we train nurses and carers for people suffering from dementia. And mostly those are students. So in the 4th year of the education, they come in for 3 days. And then if they come in, they get a specific handicap. So we may give you glasses so that you are half blind, or we take your earring, or we give you anything so that the only way that you can walk is that way. So you may not choose your handicap, you get it from us. So, and then many of those people are laid on bed, etc., etc. Sometimes people with the handicaps are the teachers, and then the students get the assignment to take care. And they have to do everything. Sometimes there are students one another. So it's amazing. So the students that think that they are going to be a nurse are on bed themselves with a specific problem that we taught. And they are on bed and they think, my goodness, I want somebody to be here for me. Or they report that they can hear all kinds of pleasant noises outside the room and say, what are you doing there? Why is there nobody coming in for me, etc. And then they are washed. So that is a chapter itself. They say, well, I want to be to the university, but I don't want to be washed by anything else. But then we say, that's what you are going to do with other people. So what's the problem? Put off your bra, so to say. So what we do is, what we try to say, if you are going to be a helper or a carer or whatever, you should be or should have been on the place of the patient. So people that are working in the field of poverty, they are living 1 month on the absolute minimum. To say, then you have to find out, etc., etc. I have been trained myself in that way, so we call it an exposure, kind of exposure. You do it for 3 days, which is rather long, to be honest. So after a few hours, people report to us, yeah, I know, I have the point, I understand the point, shall we stop? Shall we stop? No, we go on. And then they say, it's rather confronting themselves. Then they feel extremely what they want to do and what they think. And the only thing that they learn from it is, don't think that you know what's going on with the patient. You know it for yourself. Don't think that you know it for all the people here. So what you learn is modesty. What we do, if people have had that kind of training for 3 days or 2 days or whatever, then people are sitting together and evaluating, and we take 3-4 hours for evaluating, when not the experience itself is learning, but the thinking about it. So what is it? What kind of voices did you hear inside yourself during that day? What are you struggling with? So it's very informative. So you see, I'm now talking about 3 bricks. So the first one is good examples with no rules, etc. So this is the brick about exposure. Our formation has 7 bricks. So if we do it in homes, we are contracting homes, and they say, well, we want our personnel to be trained in that. So we do that, and then we take for that kind of training 2 years or 3 years. So we come every month or every 6 weeks. We do it in the homes with themselves, with all this kind of elements. And please understand, it's all about reflectivity. It's not about knowing. Of course, you need knowledge. It's true. But what you need is that you are reflective. Like I am able to think about it. I am able to adjust. I'm flexible. It's difficult to say I'm a carer, but I'm inflexible. But we have. I have a movie about a social worker, and she says literally, yeah, bad chance for our clients, I'm not that flexible. Yeah. And then I hope if you have cancer or whatever, that you don't meet a doctor that say, well, bad chance for the patient, but I'm not that flexible. So that are a few things about how we do it. The other thing that I should mention a little bit is form a community of practitioners. So the concept of the community of practitioners, COP, they call it COP, it's very essential. So in the hospitals where I'm working, most people are educated personally or individually, or they have a program on the internet thing, and then they should go and then for a specific module, and then look to that, and then they have what you call a thing in the box or whatever. So, but people learn very much about being together, to talk together about the world, to share your experience, to be on different positions. So form a community. So that are a few of our.
One of the elements that you mentioned, and that brings us to the research project from binnenuit is, I mean, there's this whole thing of what is empathy is, you know, walking 1,000 miles in someone else's moccasins, and you know, I've done the experiential dementia experience where I was actually at a conference in Nashville. We were on the 25th floor of this hotel, and I did the experiential dementia experience. So you get, you know, but at the same time, the night before, there was a hurricane warning. And all I remember was that this fear of, I'm going to put these earphones on, because I mean, I've never experienced a hurricane, or the obsession that the Americans had with the hurricane. And at one point there was a siren going off, and I thought, oh my God, the hurricane has hit the hotel. I think it was close to some, but I mean, so this research project looks at, can we ever experience the lived reality of a person with dementia? Tell us about that.
Well, we have started a few years ago a research project with the title, What It Is to Live with Dementia. What is it to live with dementia? And of course you can read beautiful novels, fiction, there's good fiction, there are diaries. So at home I have a rather big library with all kinds of diaries of people. So, and then you will say, well, we know from fiction, from movies, from scholarly publications, etc., what it is. So we are informed, but you will see that most of that kind of literature is focused on the beginning of dementia, when are people more at the end, so to say, not very honorable to show expressing that way, but at the end there is little literature, and that is because there is a strong opinion that their humanity is lacking, or you can't understand it anymore, or it doesn't make sense to try to understand it anymore. So we focus on the end. saying there is a lack of knowledge, so to say. And we did two things, and we recorded them in a book. So it was mentioned in the program of today. This is the folder of the book. I will come to it. So but I'm not talking about this book. It's Dutch. It's written in Dutch, so probably not too accessible to you. The first thing that we did, our whole staff, you get a patient, so to say, or resident, stay with them. And they did that for a month. So we came back on a specific day in the week, etc. And we had people suffering from very severe dementia. Many of them were just in bed, and focus, how so attitude or thing. And they sit and look. And we asked them to report as carefully as they could what they are seeing. So you see, it starts with being with them, observing as precise as you can. So, and then, if you look to the first diaries, they say, I don't see anything. And if you look to the last diaries, they are full of stories. So it's incredible that if you are looking for a long time, then you, I'm referring to one of our staff members that said, well, I was looking to the face and I don't see anything. And in the end, she was able to describe 7 muscles that signed, she used the word signing the feeling of the patient. So it's incredible. Other people say, well, I look to the hand is just like that, and sometimes I see that it's going a little bit open or a little bit closed. A little bit open, a little bit closed. So what you could see is that after a long time, your senses are sharpened, so to say. You see more, and then they say that they got the feeling that they understood in a better way what was going on. So in just general terms, joy, anxiousness, or wanting, so one of them reported it was doing this, and then they say, I interpret that as come nearer, come nearer, come nearer. We always said that is what you think that you see. We never know. We will not know, we can't know, we are not in that head or in that body, we don't know. But it's amazing that if you have that kind of observations, very precise observations, and you adapt your care to that, then you see less problematic behavior, you see more relaxedness, etc. You can find out, even the doctor said, they use less medication. so you never know whether or not your interpretation is true. But what you can see is that if you treat with that kind of information, your care is better. So that was one part of it. I come to our general conclusions. The other part was amazing. It was done by my colleague. He got the idea there is theater, plays where actors are playing people with dementia. So you can see it in movies or in the theater. And his idea was, it was a very good idea, but his idea was we should ask them what they experience when they are playing people suffering from dementia. And we should ask them how they prepare to do so. What are they doing? So the other part of the research was the research on 4 actors that are playing people suffering from dementia. 2 of them are involved in an educational trajectory for nurses and doctors. So they are, I would say, they know how to handle learning situations, etc. And then for me, it was incredible what they got out of that interviews with how people do. So some of them say, what I have to do is, of course, we are reading books, and we are etc. But I have to go back to a situation in my own biography where I was confused or disorientated. What they all do is going back to a moment that they think that is that I couldn't make chocolate of the world. I don't know how it works. I don't know how it works. So they are not trying to be empathic and saying, well, I try to be in your head. They say, you have that kind of experience yourself. And they are very precise how to reach that point and how to do it. And then they say, if I reach the point, I can play it. And if I'm going to play it, I'm leaving that spot. I'm leaving that spot. And then I come into that kind of reality. And it was amazing what they could report about honor, about being seen, about being touched, etc., etc. So for me, that kind of research was an amazing, informative part. Very, very good. And we learned from them, and that has, so to say, become one of our big theoretical concepts. They said, if I'm playing somebody suffering from dementia, advanced dementia, then sometimes I feel the wall. And they mean by that, so their language is full of metaphors, so not an analytic language, but it's the wall. I want to say anything, but it doesn't come out. I want to bring my hand with a piece of bread to my mouth, but in the midst I don't know what that hand is doing. It doesn't arrive. There is always a wall. So that the wall. Other authors said, yeah, but we are feeling a wall, but nevertheless, everything is entering in this. There is no wall at all. So we have no filters anymore. There is no protection, etc. And then we understood, and that was the central concept, if you are suffering from dementia, you have a highly ambiguous, there is the wall and there is the unprotectedness. And then we looked much more in detail to all other things in dementia, and we think, I have to look at my papers, but I can say you, it's the same with the body. My body, so to say, is not obedient anymore to me, so if I give it instructions, it doesn't work, etc., etc. And on the other way, I am just a body. I have nothing more than the body because there is no vivid life in my head or whatever. So I have no body and I'm just a body. So again, ambivalence. So we think in the end, it's the same with language. So they say our normal language that is explaining our meanings and carrying our meaning, we don't have that language anymore. And then we have another kind of language, and it's the only language that we have, that, for instance, your body or anything like that. So ambivalence, and it's very difficult to handle. So we are now making learning programs on the basis of that kind of ambivalence and say, it's true, there is a wall, and there is absolute openness. That's true too. And then they say, yeah, but it's hard to handle. Yes, it is, but it's both are true. So that kind of ambivalence. But I have to say the precise observations, they are very rewarding, but not simple to do. And what we did with that kind of observations, and we did with the interviews from the authors, we gave that kind of information back to the carers. So normally, as you know, scientific research should be validated in a statistical way or whatever. And we validated all these kind of conclusions with the carers and the family members. And we said to them, for instance, about that ambiguity, we think in the end there's kind of ambiguity. And then people suffering from dementia themselves, so in the early stage, validated. Family members validated. Carers said that is a good way to understand how it is. So I'm amazed that, so of course, we are scholars and we do our scholarly thing. Also, but in the end, the validation is done by people who care. So that is another amazing thing. And they validated the feelings of that person. So that's amazing.
It reminds me of the book of Nader Shabahangi, who wrote The Ambiguity of Suffering. And that comes out very, very strongly, the two extremes, or actually direct opposites. And he said, that it is often we think that it is the role of the medical fraternity or caregiving to take away that ambiguity. Instead, what you've done now is to say, let's go into that ambiguity. And that's so difficult for us because we want to solve problems, we want to sort things out. And also, very much part of the system is that we want that inflexibility. 8 o'clock is breakfast and 12 o'clock is lunch. So we are constantly forcing people out of that ambiguity into our fixed structures and fixed ideas. But before we go to questions, and this is the what really intrigues me is with what we now know. What do we know about? I always say that dementia is a disease of the brain, not of the soul. So in this research, and I mean, we are sitting in Nazareth House after all, because I'm beginning to think that perhaps we should have a complete different look at people living with dementia and look at them as being in an altered state, in a different reality. And the more we try to bring them back into this concrete realm of breakfast, lunch, and supper, and we miss that deep soul spiritual connection. I have had some of my most profound moments in life just being with the person living with dementia, that there is such a deep and spiritual connection without language.